Hi everyone, it's Ren here. Hope you're doing well, guys. It's been 2 weeks going incognito. Just been really busy with work and other things, so haven't really had time to spend on YouTube. But I am back now, and hopefully on a regular basis again. I wanted to make a little video about a topic that recurs, in conversations I have with people when types are discussed, but also comments I get from people, comments I get on videos and that kind of thing. It's the topic of, well, as you probably know from the title, passive aggression. The question is there a correlation between type and passive aggression? So having thought about it, my answer would be yes and no at the same time, because you can certainly not, say that there's a type that is particularly correlated with passive aggressive behavior more than another type, because you'll find essentially that there are many different kinds of passive aggressive behavior, and types that practice passive aggression, people of a certain type that practice passive aggression, will tend to orient themselves naturally towards the methods, the passive aggressive methods that they are best at, or that they see themselves as being best at. Because in a sense, passive aggression, you have to keep in mind, passive aggression is a strategy for someone who wants to be aggressive with someone else, but is conflict avoidance, at least with that person. So passive aggression always comes from a place of conflict avoidance, but somehow the aggression needs to be expressed. So instead of surmounting the conflict avoidance and expressing the aggression in frontal, blunt, preferably not too aggressive words, the route that's taken is a bit roundabout, because it is imagined that the effect will be preserved, but the backlash will be avoided because the aggression is passive. Now, if we say that the correlation is between conflict avoidance and passive aggression, which seems to me to be undeniable, because someone who's not conflict avoidance will, why would they bother being passive aggressive? They'll just go for the conflict straight away, and they'll hopefully approach it in a constructive manner. So if we're talking about conflict avoidant types, then it becomes quite clear, I think, that feelers are more likely to be passive aggressive than thinkers. And again, I have to say that in this particular case, it's pretty clear that this is the case. At least it's the case in my experience, and in my experience of seeing other people be passive aggressive toward other people. Now, let me just add a proviso, which is that doesn't mean that thinkers are not capable of passive aggression. Thinkers are certainly very capable of passive aggression, because in certain circumstances, if you want to kind of break someone, I know it sounds kind of dark, but if you want to break someone, passive aggression might be the best way to break them, because you do not give access to the victim of the passive aggression the means to explain themselves, or even the means to understand what's going on. So it's like they can sense their victim, they're the victims of certain forms of threat and aggression, but they're not capable of fully even making it intelligible to themselves, and that can be very damaging. I think that actually passive aggression, when carried out over long periods and by very manipulative people, can be extremely damaging and terribly damaging. And there are certainly thinkers that are capable of it. I always think about Nurse Ratched in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. She would be a thinker for sure, and yes, there's a lot of passive aggression going on. So again, thinkers practice it. Nobody is by definition protected from the temptation of passive aggressive behavior. But I think that for what I want to discuss here, I think that if you take the full spectrum of the population, because feelers tend to be conflict avoidance, they will more naturally opt for passive-aggressive measures than thinkers. So now, among the feelers, there are different strategies available, okay? So first of all, I think that if you take the feelers, there are a number of feelers that I think are less likely to be passive-aggressive, and I'm thinking specifically of ISFPs, I'm thinking of ISFJs, and I'm thinking of ESFPs as well. Now, I think there's partly, when it comes to ISFJs, if I want to start with them, I think part of the issue is that if you look at their type, they don't have that many resources to be passive aggressive. They do have resources, which is the FE resource, because the FE resource can channel passive aggression in the name of a tribe to which the victim of the passive aggressive behavior is deemed, not worthy of, or it's suggested that they don't behave according to what should be done, and that can be communicated in roundabout ways. The thing is, because ISFJs are dominated by SI, I just don't think it's a type that is going to have the easiest access to this kind of measure, and that if they do so, they might not necessarily be the best at it. And I think that you could apply this to a type that's very different, and it's the ISFP type, because ISFPs, if they want to be passive aggressive, they're going to channel their passive aggression, much like INFPs, not in terms of what an individual is doing that is violating the principles of the tribe. They're more going to do it in a way to suggest that the person just violated their principles, but violated their feelings. They're not going to express it directly. They're going to express it indirectly by moods, by ways of talking that are clearly off compared to how they would usually behave. But it's not going to be in terms of the tribe, because that's an FE thing. But unlike INFPs, ISFPs, I would say on average, they don't read people and the peculiarities of people's personalities as well as INFPs, simply because they're not intuitives. Intuitives are peculiarly equipped to read people well, and then they can, on the basis of how the person is read, they can devise their passive aggressive strategies to have the maximal effect. So ISFPs, ISFJs, not so well equipped. ESFPs, I don't know, I couldn't really tell you. I just think an SE-Dom is not likely to be somebody who engages in passive-aggressive behavior as such. I mean, it's not impossible, it certainly can happen, but again, I can't imagine that they will be particularly equipped for it, because SE is not the main, most efficient function for passive aggression, but neither is I mean, FI is, but when it's dominant, and being an extrovert sensor in general doesn't lend itself to it, with one exception, and the exception is the ESFJ. ESFJs can be very passive aggressive. You have, I think, two categories in this respect of ESFJs. You have the ESFJs that are blunt, direct, the kind of blunt FE-Dom. My dad is like that as well. He's an ENFJ, but still a blunt FE-Dom. Not often passive aggressive, sometimes passive aggressive. But when an ESFJ is a bit more conflict avoidant than that, and they're not good at being blunt, then they will be in the sense, and ENFJs are similar, the king as in queens of coming up to you and making it known indirectly to you that somehow you're failing a standard of a particular community. So it could be like, well, people in general are more polite, or people are blah, blah, blah. Even something like, if you're not on time a number of times with somebody and it pisses them off. Now, someone who's not passive aggressive will just tell you, like, listen, next time, just be on time, or otherwise we can just give up meeting up because this is annoying me. But someone who is passive aggressive about it, if they're dominated by FE like an ESFJ, they will tell you things like, it's not appropriate in a society, blah, blah, blah. It's a sign of being childish. It's a sign of not living up to being an adult. Always using these abstract kind of general categories of value. That's typical of the FE-Dom's approach. And an FI-Dom, again, will be more like, you know, you're upsetting me, you are making me wait. It's all about, you know, they make it about them in a way more than about society at large. And I think that for this reason, you know, FI DOMs like INFPs, even though they can be passive aggressive, I always have tended to see them as I see their passive aggression for some reason. Maybe it's just because it's me, I'm not sure, I haven't figured it out completely, but as a bit less of having a kind of creeping, damaging effect. Because, well, if it's about them, then you can sort of try to navigate ways towards talking to them and fixing things. Whereas if someone makes it as if it's about society, well, how do you discuss with society? How do you fix the conversation with society? So the trick here is that the person, of oftentimes an FE dominant or an FE auxiliary, INFJ more so than ISFJ, will somehow masterfully present themselves as being this kind of spokesperson for the society, and their language will manifest that. Now, I think that if you're the victim of that, you know, the first step is to keep in mind that this impression that the person is a spokesperson is an illusion. They're just good at pretending that they are, or at giving themselves the air of being that. So this is one thing to keep in mind. And this leads me to conclude the video with the mention of INFJs, because INFJs are really ideally equipped to be very passive aggressive and very damaging, very good at passive aggression, because as an IFE users, they read people very well. So they have the ability to and this is more than most types, by the way. This is more than most types. They have the ability to see what makes people tick and what makes people, what are the weaknesses of people. It's because they can see the weaknesses of people that they can have great empathy and can be so helpful with people. And by the way, they can also see their strengths. So, you know, it has a good side as well. Problem is, when an INFJ opts for passive aggression, they can sometimes use their knowledge that they've gathered from people and from reading people, not necessarily what people tell them, but also what they can guess from what people tell them, reading between the lines, reading people, facial expression, reading lots of things, gathering these insights. And then they can utilize these insights to apply to their critiques that will also be, as FE users, phrased in terms of the tribe, in terms of a certain kind of failure to live up to a standard that otherwise you're either, you know, some kind of outcast, you're some kind of child. You know, this recurs often. You know, like you're not an adult. You know, that kind of thing. So this kind of impersonal judgments of your failures, of your personality and moral failures. Imagine that you do this and you have amazing insight into people's personalities. Well, you can imagine the damage that you could do, which is also a call to INFJs like myself and many others to be careful with that. You know, it might be tempting at times to opt for passive aggression because it's an alternative on paper to conflict, but always keep in mind it can be extremely damaging to people. So keep this in mind. Unlike the ESFJ will compensate for their lesser insight into people's minds usually by the force of the social community that they have managed to kind of coordinate to create the exclusion. So it will be a social exclusion. The INFJ will usually have less social force because they're introverted and they don't coordinate people like that. The tribe is not coordinated, but they can read people and they can make suppositions. They can make, you know, statements that imply these abstract kind of failures to reach a standard, and they can be just as damaging. So INFJs, keep in mind, you have this power. It's not a good power. To the extent that it is possible, refrain from using it. Okay, and that was my little peek into type and passive aggression. Hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you soon, guys.